Hi there. Today's video is a guiding review of Park City Ski Resort in Park City, Utah. I visited in March 2022 with my dad and got in 2 days of pretty clear weather and 1 day of snow. This was 1 weekend day and 2 weekdays, no holidays. This resort's primary claim to fame right now is being large. Second most skiable acreage in North America after Whistler Blackcomb at 7,300. Tied with Big Sky for longest total trail length at 155 miles, outright leader in number of trails at 348. You get the picture, but that reputation comes with some baggage, which I will be discussing. First, a summary of how this resort stacks up to its peers, then moving on to the various areas of the map for a quick overview of each. First off, ease of access, significantly above average. Flying into Salt Lake City and driving 45 minutes makes this one of the easier mountains to get to. It's a big newly renovated airport with some bells and whistles, but right now it's a long walk to many of the gates. The resort altitude sits between about 6,500 and 10,000 feet, and while that can trigger altitude sickness, it's lower than many Colorado resorts. The drive has a lot of elevation to it, but it's all on major roads. Second, the town. Significantly above average. Park City is a large and well-established area with a nightlife and extensive free transit system. It's also known for things outside of skiing, like the Sundance Film Festival. This actually makes it tend more towards too crowded more than anything else, which some people might not like, but that means it's not lacking in amenities. Next, quantity of runs. First rate. As I said earlier, this is one of the largest resorts in North America. Large beginner areas and lots of everything up to hikeable double blacks. I was able to get a super high level feeling for the various areas in 2 days, but even with 3, I didn't feel like I spent much time in many of them. You could spend a few more, I'd think, before heavily repeating. This is Park City's best attribute. Next, quality of runs. Average. I have to distinguish it from quantity, and yet the sheer number of runs means there's a little of everything at this resort. The primary reason I say average is that Park City feels less like one massive resort and more like a bunch of smaller resorts stuck together, where each of these smaller areas is pretty average in its own right. There's a smattering of trails that stood out to me as great, which I'll mention later, but those tended to be only 1 or 2 per very large area, and each area seemed to have some drawback associated with it too that kept it from shining. Though, speaking of shining, thankfully most areas had a good angle on the sun. I'm not one to remark too much on snow quality since I don't feel I can judge a place on that in only a few days, but another thing is that a lot of folks were remarking at a general lack of grooming, which when paired with a generally low snow season, left a lot of trails in a bad state and some closed. I can't fault them too much for snow cover, and yet Deer Valley right next door was 100% open and had far fewer coverage issues. I feel I was looking for this massive resort to have some correspondingly massive and impressive trails to point to, and what I found was basically a bunch of normal trails scattered across a variety of peaks, and so in the end, trail quality felt pretty average. Next, technology. Average. The Epic Pass scanners on the lifts are efficient and work well. They've got some 6-person chairs in places, and that's appreciated. Epic Mountains also get props from me for having maps directly on the safety bars on the chairs of some lifts. I wish everywhere did that, but none of the lifts are very new, and my dad pointed out that very few had footrests, and that bothered him. They also don't have "You Are Here" markers on their big maps at the top of the lifts. Very silly omission. Overall, their tech was fine, but they could do better. Next, natural beauty. Average. This resort is composed of multiple similar mountains rather than being dominated by a single core element, but there are at least a couple places that are isolated and noticeably higher than others that you could almost call the top. The Jupiter area in particular stands out for this, so I'll at least give them an average score, but most of the resort is kind of rolling peaks interspersed with a lot of expensive houses. Next, food. Significantly below average. Rant time. Getting lunch actively made me mad on 2 of our 3 days, which needless to say is not good for a vacation. It was originally promising because they have multiple cafeterias up on the mountain on both the Park City side and the canyon side of the resort, in addition to those at the base, but they were almost all closed without explanation. It wasn't a pandemic precaution because they were perfectly fine with us being indoors in some buildings. Best guess is they didn't have the staff. The acceptable experience was at the base on the Park City side at the Legacy Lodge, where we did find a table and didn't have trouble with lines, though the food was standard overpriced, mediocre burgers and pizza ski mountain food. Tombstone Barbecue closed their indoors and ran one little window for alcohol and another little window for food. I waited in line for 30 minutes for food. The chili was not good, but the brisket was actually impressive. Too bad that did not make up for the waste of time. The Red Pine Lodge was our third attempt at lunch, and that ended up having an open cafeteria indoors, but with about 2 to 3 times more people attempting to eat there than it seemed built for. No surprise when they closed nearly all the choices. It was an absolute madhouse, taking again 20 plus minutes to get mediocre food, even after choosing the shortest possible cuisine line to spare my blood pressure. The checkout credit card scanner was taking forever and delaying things further. Maybe it ran on the LTE network because there was no cell signal in the building and no free Wi-Fi. I feel like I should be giving them slack due to pandemic issues, but I don't want to. They deserve to be raked over the coals. They're charging full price for lift tickets, and the Vail Corporation made $800 million profit last year. I looked it up. Pay a living wage, hire some more people. Which leads us to customer service, slightly below average. Most of the people I interacted with were perfectly pleasant, so I'm not going to trash them totally on this, but as I said, there were not enough of them. The resort felt like they were trying to get by on as few staff as possible, certainly not going for any kind of premium customer experience. And I'm a bit sour about their closing a handful of lifts, seemingly because they couldn't staff them. And finally, crowds, significantly below average, as in there were a lot of people causing the experience to suffer. Part of the impact of closing a few less important lifts is that it increases the squeeze on the others just a little bit more and creates choke points. Even on non-holiday weekdays, a number of lifts end up with 10 to 20 minute lines. Not so bad, especially if you hop in the singles lines or stick to higher expertise areas, but this is about comparing to other resorts, and the fact is these crowds were bigger than most other places I visited. You can decide for yourself which of these things matter most to you, but for me this resort is overall slightly below average. Kind of a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none approach to a ski resort. Mass market appeal without really achieving excellence anywhere. I'm sure the experience will continue to evolve, and you might say I hit a bad time or season or something, but all I can do is judge based on the experience I had. And as is, I think I'd only recommend it for a group that's new to going out west to ski. The easy access and large number of easier areas might make it a good introductory resort if you don't mind the crowd. Now for a rundown of the various areas grouped as the website does. Going left to right on the map, the Park City Mountain Village has the main lifts of Payday, Town, and Crescent. Town is crazy slow, don't take it unless you're staying at its base. Payday is surprisingly strong for being right at the bottom, with multiple decent blues, a couple blacks, and some glades feeding off it, as well as the single long Payday run itself actually being one of my favorites at the whole resort. Crescent is a big lift, but is mostly useful to get you elsewhere on the mountain. Seeing down from it, you'd only have 2 choices, either the blue-green area that literally everyone gets funneled into and is a zoo, or one of a slew of nearly completely ignored large black mogul faces that seem to have terrible snow quality when I was there.
Skiing on base! Can't see shit!
King Khan to the right there has great potential, as it's basically just about 10 blue runs all right next to each other, but in practice these aren't very long and they're very similar to each other, plus a few at least hadn't been taken care of and you wouldn't want to ski them. No big crowds here, so not a bad area, good for intermediates. Moving up, they group Bonanza, Pioneer, and McConkey's together, but they are very different. Bonanza serves green-blue terrain and gets crowded, despite none of the runs seeming very differentiating. Pioneer actually serves some interesting blues and blacks, but is very slow and feels punishing to ride. They need to upgrade this lift. McConkey's is one of my favorite areas of the resort. A 6-person share that didn't have a line and serves interesting terrain, mostly blacks and double blacks, but also a long blue catwalk called Georgiana with many interesting glades of varying difficulties off to the sides. Shout out to the Black Tycoon as one of my favorites at the mountain. I also really like the double black McConkey's bowl under the lift. Definitely a recommended area if you aren't a beginner. The Thaynes lift was closed, so Pioneer was required to get to Jupiter, which is an area all its own. Easily the most isolated and out in the wilderness I felt at the whole resort, like by an order of magnitude if you could measure it in such a way, enhanced by how much of a pain it was to get there. Pioneer is slow, Jupiter access is a boring long catwalk, and then Jupiter lift itself is a slow old double. But it was nice to get away from the crowds as the area is only double blacks. If that's your thing, it's worth checking out.
Woo! Ha! Yeah. Can you see these? These are serious freaking moguls.
Below that is Thaynes, Motherlode, and Silverlode. As I said, Thaynes is a double chair that was closed for no particular reason. The runs under it were open, but were hard to get to. Because of that, though, Keystone was really great the one time I did it. Shame the area is so awkward to reach. Motherlode is the next lift down and is a good choice to ride. Quick quad without much of a line that serves intermediate and advanced terrain under it, but also gives access to many other places. The Parley's Park Blue was one of my favorites. Whereas Silverlode is one of those choke points they've created and has the worst line at the resort, regularly 15 plus minutes due to the mountain design and the beginner runs funneling people there. And those lines were with the major restaurant at its base being closed, so I hate to think what it normally is. They say they're upgrading the lift for next season, but we'll see how that helps. Another reason it's crowded is that this is where the Quicksilver Gondola connects Park City to the canyon side of the resort, drops you over on what they call Iron Mountain. There are actually some nice looking long blues under the Iron Mountain lift, but unfortunately they apparently suffer first when there's low snow cover and we're mostly closed. Lead foot that I could take was quite a nice run, but do know that the blue runs not directly under Iron are just catwalks. Snow Under, Golden Spruce, White Pine, and Cascade are no fun at all. If Iron is open, I think the 5 or 6 runs under it would be good. Above that is the Dreamcatcher, Dreamscape, Daybreak, and Peak 5 area. Dreamscape and Daybreak were closed, and Dreamcatcher is painfully slow, which is such a shame because hitting the Phantasm Black Run groomed in the morning was one of the best runs I took at the resort. I just couldn't bring myself to stay on that lift. It was too much of a waste of time. Maybe if one of those gets upgraded or you have a lot of patience, I could recommend the area. The right half of this area with all the little roads on the map was like 75% houses and 25% runs. Some of the runs were better than catwalks, but even those were kind of narrow and crowded. Not much of a reason to be here on purpose. You just kind of end up here on your way elsewhere. To the right is Tombstone, 9990, and the other half of Peak 5. These are mostly expert areas with 9990 serving exclusively double blacks. As with Jupiter, obviously no lines on 9990, and unlike Jupiter, this is easy to get to and a quick lift. I think that gives it the edge if you want double blacks. Though, be warned, while I didn't go everywhere, I didn't find them to be very challenging compared to other examples of double blacks I've done, so not the hardest area. Tombstone has access to easy ways down, so it was unfortunately crowded, but at least it's quick. I didn't get into the bowl here, but I quite liked the Sidewinder Black Run. If you can ski these runs, I think these lifts are good bets to spend your time. The next area is big, covers Saddleback, Orange Bubble, and Sun Peak. Saddleback has some blacks down the middle, but is mostly a beginner area and quite crowded. I would mostly avoid it. Sun Peak was closed for no particular reason, so that was a pain, but you can get to all the runs off Orange Bubble, which is a cool looking lift with a mid-station. I found myself on the Big Blue Echo run a number of times here and liked that a lot, as well as the Silverado Bowl Black area, which had few people. I think the runs under Orange Bubble struck perhaps the best balance at the resort of size, quality, and reduced crowds. Highly recommend this area. And finally, Condor, an interesting hiking area off the back if you're interested in that, but otherwise basically a bunch of abandoned, thin-covered double blacks on the left, some short and steep, icy single blacks on the right, and 90% of the people on the Blue Run Boa, since the other blue had moguls. I can only recommend this area if you know there's a lot of snow on the ground. Though taking the little rope tow at the bottom to get back to the base was a fun surprise. Many of the runs off Orange Bubble lead you here too, so I took this thick bunch. And that's all I've got for now. If it was helpful, please let me know by liking, subscribing, commenting, whatever. If you let me know what to improve, I'll work on it for next time. And that's a wrap for the 2021-2022 season. Thanks for watching.
You got me like